Welcome back to Action World. Today we have Canice, who is a commentator based in Calgary. We are gonna talk about China's overseas police station and how it affects every one of us. So Canice, it's good to have you appear on Action World for the first time.
Thank you, Edward.
In English.
Thank you.
Right. So I guess we don't need the camera. So just switch
Okay.
it to voice.
Sure.
Now, I was reading an article from Voice of America talk about China's overseas police stations. Actually, the investigation is done by a human rights group that there are over 54 Chinese overseas police stations that do a lot of activities. Could be, for instance, if someone has a mainlander has a tax evasion,
Right.
and then ran overseas, and then they will use force,
Yes.
sometimes brute force too.
Yes, there's a Canadian case actually
yeah.
for that from based in Vancouver, not
Yeah.
About 20 years ago.
And to just to arrest that person and then bring them back to mainland for trial.
Yes.
Yeah. So these overseas police stations, according to the report, there are three, actually at least three, located in
Canada.
Toronto.
Yes.
Yeah, Toronto area.
One in Toronto and two in Markham.
Yeah, Greater Toronto. So I'm sure, like with Chinese consulate in Calgary and also in Vancouver, there could be more.
Definitely, there would be more. There would be pocket ones. A lot of people didn't realize that. In terms of, just want to give you a little brief history of the Chinese interference. Actually, it started back in 1950 when it started as a country, beginning with Mao. So there's a guy by the name of political science professor from McGill University in Montreal called Paul Lin. He was actually a spearhead kind of the interference project, and was a sage to Henry Kissinger and a lot of those people in the 60s who now are pretty much world-dominated political power echelon and the elite. Now, let's just fast forward it a little bit here. In Canada, in fact, there are at least close to 250 of these United Front Works Department, or UFWD for short. Many of these organizations can be national, they can be regional, or they can be local, and they are all over in Canada. Say, for example, I can give you a very good example in terms of the Chinese Freemason, for example. They are not just in terms of all over the cities, in terms of Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and so forth, but they are also in small town as well too. So this is something that I mentioned to the National Integrated Security Police, whom I am helping out writing a report with for the past 3 years. It's just that you don't just key on just in terms of the big area or just in terms of the regional area. Sometimes you have to focus on some of the rural areas too, because their involvement can be quite a bit more substantial than you think.
So these are, you mentioned Chinese Masons. It's like the
Chinese
Freemasons.
Yes, that's right.
共濟會, right? Like in the free world, we know what the Freemasons are.
Yeah, the Chinese Freemasons in a way is a little bit different in terms of the history. If I want to say it in Chinese, actually, it is called Hong Moon. Okay. And in fact, when they started, actually, they were rebel against the late Qing dynasty. And in fact, back in the Revolution Day from Dr. Sun Yat-sen, for many of his travel overseas for fundraising against the Qing dynasty, a lot of the fundraising were done through the Chinese Freemasons, believe it or not. Okay, back in that time, they were very much in terms of pro-democracy. However, a lot of these views have been changed ever since in the 1960s and 1970s, when the Soviet Union trying to infiltrate to North America. and the People's Republic of China and Mao just kind of piggyback around there without the Canadian government knowing. Now, if you want to extrapolate that from not just in terms of Canadian government, you can also say that in terms of U.S. government, because they have a similar organization called the Chinese Progressive Association, starting in San Francisco and one in Boston. Is one of the biggest and one of the
What's it
largest.
in Cantonese? Chinese Progressive Association.
It is called it is called 中华促进会. Okay, yeah. So a lot of the names actually, in terms of the United Front, that they don't want to sound to seem to be very, very upfront and antagonistic. That's not what they wanted to do. Instead, what they wanted to do is that they want to use a generic name in terms of name progressive, in terms of improvement to Chinatown society or whatnot. So something of a generic term so that it can bypass the government and the national securities. And a lot of times that Chinese people, especially the way that they try to deal with things, um, they are they are very internal in terms of problem facing, and they don't want to report anything to the police or the government and things like that, because of the Chinese tradition in terms of saving face. Now, this is the reason why that a lot of the crimes, a lot of discrimination, racism, and so forth, they don't feel like they want to do it because it might be bringing shame to their family and the shame to Chinese race. So this is where the People's Republic of China, especially with Mao CCP, kind of come on right on in as a bridge between the Chinatown society. So in terms of it, to get these Chinese people on side with hey, they are the one Chinese New Year, they will bring them gifts, they will bring them money or whatever it is that they needed to. It's almost like a friend where the Canadian government or British government, American government tend to ignore them.
Now, I want to go focus back on the overseas Chinese police.
Right.
Now, the report is written by a human rights group called Safeguard Defenders.
Yes.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny that according to an article by VOA, it talks about these overseas police service centers may help Chinese diaspora and tourists with everyday problem, but they are also part of a complex global web of surveillance and control, allowing the Chinese Communist Party to reach far beyond Chinese borders. So would that include abducting people back to mainland?
Very much so. Very much so. Especially the way it is set up already in the Belt and Road Initiative colonies. I can give you a very simple example. The longest Canadian being held in China right now is from East Turkestan political activist who's also a Canadian. What happened was that back in 2005, he was working in Kazakhstan. But Kazakhstan is one of the closest ally in terms of the Belt and Road colony with the PRC. So therefore, the spies there knew what's going on. They called the People's Liberation Army's agent. He was arrested, and he was secretly sent back to basically the PRC under the maximum security jail without anybody noticing for the first 10 years before the Canadian government even knew what was going on. The reason why was his wife was nonstop pleading with the Foreign Affairs Affairs Department in Canada, and to be able to find out exactly what was going on. And still, after 17 years, he's still being detained.
Do you think, like the Hong Kong diaspora, the so-called Hong Kong activists, if they are still very vocal, talk about the Hong Kong issues overseas, should they be concerned about these overseas Chinese police stations? It seems like they are just an extension of the law enforcement people from mainland, but they have a lot. they don't have a license to arrest and abduct, but it seems like they can do whatever they want, and it's kind of a disguise as hardware store or just normal house, like a
It
residential
is what
place.
a lot of the times that a lot of times that in terms of the spies that is working for the the United Front Works Department, what they do is that there are, and this is really interesting. They only have about 85,000 of these overseas spies governing the whole world. So therefore, what they would do is that we call, like, in terms of the research, I would call it a few people wearing many caps. So you will have the same people that will be operating about 30 to 40 different shell companies that are that are like that. So quite a lot of times that they are trying to working things underground, like you said, and quite a lot of times too in terms of voicing their opinions against, say, for example, Canadian government, in terms of what's going on in East Turkestan a couple of years back with their unified vote of I think 266 to nil at the in the lower house of the parliament. Then you'll have these Chinese newspaper with all these organizations posting at the front page of the Chinese weeklies, saying that they're vehemently against that. It's just a domestic affairs and things like that. And they will be all saying that they will be speaking on behalf of all Chinese Canadians in that case. So many of all of these organizations are actually based on from there. Now, a lot of these agents, they are actually specialized in that kind of field, and they are all of them are directed from the PLC consulate or the embassy in itself. So the chain of command is very simple. From there, it just goes on there down, and even say, for example, if you want to say spies in terms in the university, the Chinese Students Scholars Association, CSSA, for the past 30 years all around the world, every single campus is kind of their turf. It's almost like a tribe base where they will do that course and that kind of things. Here at the University of Calgary, they are actually doing that back in 2011, I do believe, if you can just kind of quote me correctly for that. It will be the visit by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, having speech. They were voicing huge protests and that kind of thing. So they are trying to disrupt things, just not in terms of the front at the campuses, but also behind the scenes with the executives and so forth. So you will have a lot of these PLC professors who are adjunct, but also CCP members. Then they are trying to get in through the executive branches and executive council of the universities. And this is a problem of that, is that once they get in, say, for example, at the case like in Australia, where it is overwhelmingly being run by them, then they can be able to dictate whatever the terms that is. And so a lot of times these CSSA students, they are also spies in a way that they are spying on each other. So quite often that you will have these students living in the same household, but 24/7, they're always monitoring each other. And when you speak to these people, they are not really actually enjoying their overseas university life in terms of associating and sharing, in terms of multiculturalism, in terms of the diversity, or the purpose of university, which is the universality of the world. They are sticking to themselves, and they're watching themselves quite carefully. I have been actually into one of these activities back in 2019 with a ping pong tournament at the University of Calgary, where the whole thing is monitored. They're actually filming each other, make sure that they are not out of line and that kind of things. They are monitored, they are surveyed all the time. So it wasn't a very pleasant experience, a first-hand experience that I have been doing. So what I would like to say to a lot of these Hong Kongers coming here to Canada or UK and things like that, just because you are having a second chance in terms of freedom and the chances to rekindle in terms of your democracy, please don't forget that the interference and the influence of the CCP is huge. They are everywhere. Now with the police and things like that, that they can be able to adopt, kidnap, and that kind of things, they can actually bypass that first stage where they can be able to threaten you overseas from your families, colleagues, and friends from Hong Kong, PLC, Macau, or whatever it is, in terms of telling you to shut up, don't do anything stupid, or they will get hurt. So they can actually be able to do that. They can be able to do it directly. And in terms of the police interference, I can be able to say that firsthand in Canada, in British Columbia, back in 2011, the PLC provincial police were actually training with the provincial police of BC for quite extensive amount of time before they found out exactly what was going on. And not too long ago, about 3 years ago, the Canadian Armed Forces actually put a stop into the joint Arctic exercises with the PLA because it was kibosh and approved by the Trudeau government without the Canadian Armed Forces knowing exactly what's going on. And they blew the whistles at the very, very last moment, just about a couple of weeks before the commencement of that.
Okay.
And that made the national news as well.
Okay. To wrap up, I just want to read out something from VOA, the article about the Chinese overseas police. Now, this is, I think, the third last paragraph. But China appears to be doing little to conceal the operations, meaning the overseas Chinese police stations. A video produced in 2020 by the prosecutor's office in the western city of Lishui shows police conducting a remote video call with a suspect in Madrid, Spain, who was accused of criminal environmental pollution in his home city. A representative of the suspect's family in Lishui sat alongside the police and prosecutors. The video says that the suspect was persuaded, quote unquote, to return home to face charges, and subsequent photographs show the target in handcuffs at the airport in China. Since the publication of the Safeguard Defenders report last month, Spain confirmed it is investigating the incident. So this is not just commercial crime or commercial
It can be anything.
dispute.
It can be any dispute. In fact, I can be able to mention that there was a very famous case in terms of and two American citizens, which one of them was working in the PLC, and the other one was just a university student visiting her sister in the PLC. Now, the caveat of that is that their parents, their father, was a former elite rank CCP member accused of siphoning and money laundering billions of dollars. So what happened was that they were waiting until both the siblings were in the PLC, and then they went ahead and kidnapped them. So these type of hostage diplomacy is not what you call uncommon there. And actually, the U.S. had to make a special deal in terms of hostage exchange, in terms of getting them both safely. And in the case, I want to remind all the Canadian Hong Kongers, especially those who have just been recently immigrated, or the freedom fighter gaining second chance. Please don't forget that the Hong Kong national security law, under Article 38, specifically stated that anyone, I'm talking about not just Hong Kong citizens, any citizens around the world, if they conspire to speak out against the CCP, the Hong Kong SAR government, Hong Kong police, and that type of things, with rallying, protests, and that type of things, they are actually guilty of the 4 charges of the Hong Kong national security law, which is secession, sedition, terrorist activities, and foreign interference. So there are more and more people that might be getting in foul of that, had those PLC police be able to get a chance with that, because they are working hand in hand with the Hong Kong National Security's Police Department force. And as you can see, the situation that is in Hong Kong right now, we can suspect that things like that in Canada, US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and all the places where we participate in full democracy, we might see the turn for the worse, just as bad as the Belt and Road Initiative with many of the kidnappings that was happening long ago.
Okay, I guess we'll save our airtime for the next episode. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Canice.
Thank you, sir.